Thank you for downloading this podcast. You're about to explore temporal ideas with world-leading experts in considering the question, is time a separate reality? In this wide-ranging exploration of how time consciousness is constructed, my guests cover many altered states such as daydreaming, dreaming, meditation, washing up, lying in the sun, looking at your phone, drug taking, boredom and shamanic trance, to name just a few. Neuropsychologist Mark Whitman asserts that we are time, and we can't be separated from the influence of time. Jungian psychoanalyst Angeliki Jesser-Mendez holds that time is just part of an overarching timelessness in understanding how our psyche moves forward in time. Psychologist Yevgeny Osin treats time as a subjective reality. It's our subjective experience in time that enables us to actively shape and change our lives. Please like, comment and share this lively podcast in coming to your own conclusions as to whether time is a separate reality. A very warm welcome once again to the third special edition of Time Talks at the Université de Nantes with the fourth International Conference on Time Perspective. My name is Alan Beck, psychology educator, balanced time consultant and social entrepreneur. Here with me to explore the question, is time a separate reality? are Dr. Angeliki Jesser-Mendez is an independent Jungian psychoanalyst and developmental psychologist based in Cyprus. She's the author of Time and the Psyche, Jungian Perspectives, and Time and Timelessness, Temporality in the Theory of Carl Jung. Dr. Yevgeny Osin is National Research University Higher School of Economics based in Russia. He is a prolific researcher and collaborator of many studies of his own and co-authored papers about time perspective, social psychology and well-being. At the conference yesterday, he gave us a fascinating talk into the individual differences of daydreaming, entitled Dream About the Future, Not the Past. And finally, Dr. Mark Whitman is a neuropsychologist, a research fellow at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health, based in Germany. He is author of Felt Time, The Science of How We Experience Time, and his very latest book, Altered States of Consciousness, Experiences Out of Time and Self. Together with our highly knowledgeable audience and our viewers, a very warm welcome to you all. Let's attempt to explore the temporal ideas, realities, and impact of altered states, such as in meditation and dreaming. Can you, Angeliki, start us off with your first thoughts on our question today? Is time a separate reality?
Well, my thoughts are, I'm thinking of timelessness as I hear that question, actually.
Okay.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I think that timelessness is a much more embracing temporal state than time.
Okay.
That would be my first thought on that topic. And I do think that timelessness is indeed all-encompassing and does include time, which at times is a separate reality.
Sounds like time's not a separate reality.
Is that what you get out of it?
Well, that's what I've just got. What do you get?
That's interesting. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think relating to your question, I think researchers would like to have this state of time not being part of their own reality.
Yes.
I think researchers would be very happy to have it as an objective reality somewhere outside, safe outside there, which with your instruments, something you could torture and peek, and has nothing to do with yourself.
Yes.
But unfortunately, Yeah, well, for example, we age.
Yeah.
Which means that even as a researcher, we are time and we are under influence of time. That's my first answer.
Okay. And you, Evgeny?
From the point of view of physics, it's difficult for me to say because I'm not a physicist and those guys deal with realities. But we as psychologists deal with subjective realities, and definitely time is a separate subjective reality. As long as we don't think time, as long as we don't have any vision of time, we're subjected to time, we age, but we cannot have any influence on this. But once we start thinking time as a separate reality in our mind, once we start taking position towards it, we have a chance of shaping our lives in time in ways that maybe transcend the natural way of things.
Brilliant. That's a really clear answer, actually. That's lovely. So what... when it comes to dreaming or even daydreaming, how does that, is that not separate from, sorry to keep asking the same question, separate from other dreaming, other awareness of time?
The important thing about daydreaming is that it can be a constructive process, and what we are particularly interested in is what is called positive constructive daydreaming. It's a particular type of daydreaming when people try to imagine the future, imagine their possible selves, and they create this ideal vision that guides their choices in life, that gives them meaning, that creates a sense of identity, which is connected to some possible future.
Right. Yeah. So they're transcending time. It's an altered state.
It can be.
Fair enough.
Can I ask something about that?
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
So how do you compare that with time in dreams, when you're actually unconscious, when you're actually sleeping? Because daydreaming, in my understanding, there is a lot of influence from consciousness, right? I mean, you're actually directing your own vision, in a way.
Yeah, I think it's that daydreaming is much less of an altered state than normal dreaming when we sleep. But also daydreaming most often is an involuntary process. We don't really make a conscious effort. It comes to us naturally from deep within us as spontaneous images. But as we develop it, it could be some kind of a guided imagination, as Jung would practice.
Okay.
And you asked that question because you would work with your Jungian approach with dreams, is that right?
Yes, that's why I'm wondering, because I have been studying actually dreams that in a way foretell the future, prospective dreams, in which case you have no conscious control of that. It's just a dream, So I'm wondering how that relates to the daydreaming experience of creating, of dreaming your own future as an active approach versus what I observe, because I cannot manufacture that, unfortunately. Dreams that in a way foretell.
Yeah. Predict the future.
Well, it's like a forecast. You never know, do you?
Well, we're dealing with symbols,
it's a possibility. Symbols sometimes with actual images that are quite profoundly similar to reality, in awakened reality, but certainly there's no control over that.
So these, I think of it, all of the experiences in dreams as symbols, all of them, but they appear to happen at me.
Mm-hmm. At me.
Yeah, they're there. They're just suddenly there.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't have the feeling that I'm putting them there, or I'm selecting past memories, perhaps reconfiguring them, and then re-representing them to myself.
Well,
that sounds like a nice way of thinking about it, but that's not how I experience it when I'm in the dream.
Well, Freud would agree that you're actually doing that. You're taking it and you're projecting it, and you're, having a memory of it in a way. But yes, I'm more inclined to think what you're thinking.
Well, I had a very profound dream around this WIB, the Well-Being Indicator Badge. In fact, I had this sort of archetypal guy with a beard, interestingly, and he was floating in black space. So there's no light, although he was perfectly lit up. and he was totally silent, and there was absolutely no time. And I was also floating in black light space. But it was really comfortable and incredibly pleasant. And he never spoke to me, and his lips never moved, but he looked at me, and I heard his voice in my head. So I'm actually in the dream. I'm actually going, what's going on here? How does this work? What's happening to me? And at the same time, it's very compelling. Could really take my eyes off him. And then he brought his hand out, and in his hand was this badge. So he showed me this badge. And in my head, he said, take this into the world. And then I woke up. You know, come on, what do you make of that?
Analyze that.
Yeah,
Well, lay down first. Lay down.
Yes, I know.
yes,
You need to take 3 seconds analysis. So you're saying this is like a future-directed dream?
Well, look,
to take this into the world.
I literally did follow the instruction.
You follow the instruction, but that's not foretelling, is it? I mean, you didn't see. You follow the instructions given to you in the dream. What I'm saying is, seeing something that hasn't actually happened yet, and then experiencing it in real life. That's even more of a.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, what do you make of all this, Mark?
What do you mean specifically with all this
example that I've currently given? What's going? How would you look at it? How that's being constructed? Because it appeared to me to be a separate reality to the one I normally have.
Yeah, I mean, it's just these are the things I think that rarely happen in life. Yeah, it's not that would happen once a year, or once, maybe even not once, even in a decade, but less often. And these are just very important transitions, maybe. Yeah, something that comes up in. If you want to, let's say, explain it in some sort of psychological, scientific terms, it would be that some sort part of your inner self, some sort of wanted to tell yourself a specific message of how maybe to change your life. And these anecdotal reports exist. William James described people who were alcoholics and were drinking themselves to death, and then suddenly they had an apparition of maybe Maria or something, and then just from one day to the next they stopped drinking alcohol and were clean. And so these things happen just as if it were some sort of a emergency setting, maybe, that have profound influence on your life.
And maybe not so always in an emergency setting, but very much so in a, well, I following Jung's paradigm, in a way, there is a teleological movement to the psyche. So the psyche,
there's a what?
Teleological, it moves towards the actualized end, let's say. So it's forward movement. The psyche moves forward. It moves into its own future, So I think that there are pivotal moments like this, but I think that we all dream dreams like that we don't actually remember, that in some way might govern our decision-making process, perhaps, or, it's not necessary that you wake up from such a dream and you recall it, but I think that there is this function of the psyche that actually looks towards the future and sort of begs to be materialized in a way, for lack of a better word, but it's not a past-oriented function. So in that way, yes, you are given ideas, you are given possibilities that look towards the future, in that sense.
Okay. You were giving a talk earlier here around altered state and different influences. So let's take something like drug taking and the impact that has. How does that, again, I think people experience it as if it's separate, whatever the effect of the drug taking has on them. But, that's subjective, anecdotal. What's your take on that?
Well, of course, we can talk about different types of drugs,
yes,
different effects, but in general, first of all, if it's just related again, well, it is related again to your first question.
Yes.
It is basically changing yourself. So you, and there you just see really it is about yourself. That how also subjective time is changing. You are changing. Your whole world and you yourself is changing completely. It could be a heightened self-awareness, and then more and the feeling of a slowing down of time. But it could also be a loss of near loss of self-awareness in the extreme, where you then also don't feel any passage of time, or where you could go into states of timelessness.
Yeah.
So in between this, you can have everything that might happen that you find also with other induction techniques, not necessarily drugs, but it could be through meditation, trance-like states.
Right.
It could be sports, it could be orgasm in sex, it could be a lot of different things, induction methods which influence what you are and how you experience yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, well, one of the greatest insights I had from those altered states of consciousness happened when I took part in a shamanic trance session, where you don't really take any drugs, and it's just the sound and the environments that have influence on you. And I suddenly realized what Jung described as this reduction of mental level, as he called him. That basically this level of consciousness at which dreams happen and those symbols that come to us in dreams happen, it's always here. It's just that in everyday reality our consciousness is structured and it kind of overshadows this deeper level just the way you cannot see the stars during daylight. But once you get into those states of self-reflection or guided imagination or trance, those symbols and those creative processes from deep within your psyche start to reappear. And I think it's a great source of inspiration, and it's a great resource that each of us could use to gain new ideas about ways to shape our lives.
Well, I mean, and the good thing is you're not taking any drugs that could possibly harm you in any way, and
Yeah,
it's
you don't need
relatively safe because you're just changing by environment and stimulation your state. So reality isn't going away; it's not separate.
Yeah, there is no clear boundary between waking state and these trance states. But in a drug-induced state, also maybe this boundary is mostly psychological, and it's associated with the very act of taking a drug. We make this boundary between what is normal and what is not. But maybe it's only induced by this behavioral key.
So you mean the anticipation of taking the drug, like alcohol, would actually be the trigger rather than the alcohol itself? Or a bit of both? Or?
I think that we use the very act of taking drug or alcohol to explain away the things that are happening to us in these drug-induced states.
Yeah. Because the other thing is that when I was ill, I was given some very mild opiates. And I said to the doctor, is this a good idea? Because I'm in pain and it's great to have the pain taken away, but there are side effects, and I'm a bit concerned about that. No, it's all fine. Don't worry. It'd be great. Carry on. Just keep doing it. Because it's great not to have pain, which is true. But I found that actually I was a bit floaty. I was in a different time zone. I wasn't as quick to respond to external situations and things like that. But that was being clearly induced by the drug itself. But people who are living in pain all the time end up with a situation where they can become addicted. And they're not able to function as clearly, as consciously as they'd like to, or they even become so used to it that they forget what a healthy consciousness, if I can call it that, is. So what would you make of that situation there? Just like I did in the end, I went, I'm not taking these anymore. Because I'd rather be in pain and have a clearer mind.
Well, there are different types of addiction. There is physical addiction, which can happen when you have opiates. And this is a very real phenomenon. And there is also psychological addiction when you need some kind of drug or some kind of even ritual or something to make you feel better. And these are things that can happen.
Well, you gave some examples of the shamanic, where you experience for yourself. So not only are you a researcher researching these areas, but you actually did something. Have you ever done anything interesting that's altered your state?
Well, not like that. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many altered states of consciousness within the norm, within our lives, and as is, I mean, even lying in the sun is a completely different state of consciousness than now, being filmed and, having to think, being on your toes, so even within the day, taking a bath, having a meal, it's a very, and as we were discussing previously with Mark, I think it also has to do with the stimuli around you and the way that is filmed in a way, like the music at the background could even make a difference. So even that alone, we know for a fact, alters your perception of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one could even argue that let's say the prototypical psychologists and neuroscientists have some sort of this idea of two states, two possible states.
Right.
And one would be the waking state, and there we would be, let's say, 16 hours awake, alert, and always attending to something. And then the 8 hours of sleep. And this, I think, was also actually like a paradigm in thinking about human beings. And when scientists do experiments which take a little longer, they assume, let's say we want to do an attention test or a perceptual test on a computer screen, and then I've been subject myself on these tasks, and I'm an experimenter with such tasks. Then you think for 45 minutes you could have the same vigilant state of a subject. But of course, after 5 minutes, boredom sets in, then annoyance and drowsiness and mind wandering,
daydreaming,
and you see the reaction times going up and down, and this already this shows that you have fluctuations, but of course you have then daily fluctuations, fluctuations over the day, across the day, from drowsiness, sleepiness to total alert excitement, complete happiness, and then a little depressed mood because we heard a sad message, and it just goes up and down and up and down. And so you could say, so your states of consciousness alter constantly.
I think that's a really important point. People don't think about it. So you're talking about, lying in the sun, having a bath, maybe walking from the living room to the kitchen. Actually, this is something that because we're talking also about attention, aren't we? Our ability to be conscious of what we're focusing our attention on and what we're experiencing as a result of doing. So, but people don't generally have that awareness of what they're up to. They just think, I'm carrying out a task I think I've just thought, I need to do the washing, put the washing out on the washing line. So that's all they're doing. There isn't anything more interesting in it than that. In fact, they might resent the task, but do it anyway because they've got to. But going to work, coming home, meeting people you know, people you don't know. Surely that's all part of altered state of
or washing your dishes and even enjoying it.
And you can enjoy.
I get in some sort of trance while doing it, and doing that and thinking, and then being somewhere absent and being very calm and
it's a way of rest.
Our education system doesn't present tasks like that. I mean, even the process of learning. Although, as you get older, certainly in higher education, you might look at metacognition and learning how to learn, and that can make you more active in the learning process. And also appreciate confusion, not knowing, things like this, because a lot of people find not knowing, being confused as a bad thing, as a negative outcome. And in some way they're not very intelligent, something like this.
Or similar to boredom, that people very too early or too much likely want to escape boredom, although it actually can be a very interesting process to suddenly suddenly realize things you hadn't realized before, huh? If you go through boredom states.
Yeah. I mean, my youngest daughter once came up to me. I just happened to be being attentive at the time, and said, "I'm bored," and went off on a long diatribe about how bored she was, and in great detail about the implications of the boredom. And I happened to think, well, this is really interesting, so I let her talk about it, and I listened. And she says, so, what are you going to do? So, I'm a parent, obviously I'm responsible. So I sort of said, well, I'm not going to do anything. But I'll come back in 20 minutes. So she sat down in a bored state, annoyed with me. When I came back, though, she was drawing a beautiful picture.
There's a big, it's almost like fashionable these days. I've come across it in different sources. Let your kids be bored kind of message, which I find kind of funny because it's not up to us. They will be bored. Boredom is part of life. But it's almost like you need to explicitly state it. Let your kids be bored. This is a good thing for the brain. But I think it's also a matter of how you perceive these moments of boredom. And another catchphrase these days is mindfulness. Everybody talks about mindfulness, which is essentially attention. It's not really all that new in that way. But it's almost like we have collectively discovered this now, or rediscovered the wheel, that this is actually something that helps with giving more meaning to our lives in a way, because it's essentially what it is. But yes, the boredom pill.
I think it's also a matter of, let's say, but it's of course also discussed everywhere, that we're getting too much input in too short time. We're bombarded with information, and that we may have lost some sort of the propensity to just sit alone in a room and be happy with just relaxing and doing nothing, because we're constantly some sort of trying to get input, and basically avoiding thereby feeling yourself.
Right.
That's basically what you could say what boredom is, avoiding attending to yourself. So this is basically also what you see. Let's say you're sitting in a bus, four people get into the bus, they sit down, and immediately at the same time, like in a choreography of a dance, they all get their cell phones out and then immediately start looking at their phones. So this is also then just trying avoiding boredom, which maybe this could be a critique of our society. Of course, that's voiced everywhere.
Yes.
But essentially, psychologically stated, it's trying to avoid getting into contact with yourself.
Which is why boredom breeds creativity, because that's exactly what happens, right? You're bored and you fall into a state of self-observation. You have to be attentive to the feelings, and that's actually where ideas come from, and that's where the stimuli lies. It's not external. Usually, it's an internal process. So,
boredom is a kind of existential challenge. There is a piece of time and a piece of your life, and there is a question of what you're going to do with it. And some people find those moments so unpleasant because the very contact with themselves and the contact with their lives as a whole is painful to them, and they escape those moments of solitude by all means, trying to be constantly in contact to avoid experiencing themselves on their inner suffering or their questions about life to which they have no answer, and they constantly keep confronting them. But a normal way of answering to this challenge is to face it and to try and find an answer. What is my life about now? Who I am? What do I want?
And not Google the answer.
Well, my life is about washing up now, and I'm enjoying it now, and it's about different levels of appreciation, regardless of where you are in the fluctuation. Yeah, because we're fluctuating all the time. And you say that we are time. So rather than thinking about clock time, which is, in a way, I mean, I'm going to say this, and hopefully you'll pick it apart, but clock time is a separate reality. We've made that up. You know, it's not Friday today. It's not really 4:30 or whatever, because it's all just an abstract. It's a convenient organizing tool, sure, but it's actually made up if we compare it with the way we look at calendar time and clock time to the Mayans, for example. You know, they didn't have 7 days; they had 5. So it's like we have kind of made it up, and maybe that's why I would think about it or talk about a separate reality.
But it's still a human reality. It's social
yes,
time. Yeah? It's
yeah,
social
absolutely.
time, and we need clock time to sort of synchronize us. Yeah?
Yes.
So that if we arrange something, it could even be just at sunset. Yeah? But we need at least some, if it's not in the minute range, but we need some reference.
Yes.
Both of us, where we can say, okay, then we meet, and that is social time, which is important. So it's for human interrelations. Yeah.
I think it would be absolutely chaotic. I mean, I don't think it could be. I don't think we could live without it. We would come up with something as human beings, as social beings.
We
I
clearly
don't think
have.
It could be.
You know, it doesn't matter which epoch you look at. There's a version of an organizing time system, that thing called time, and yet we each have our own individual. We are each the creators of our own time, depending on how conscious we are of what's going on around us.
Yeah, you experience it. Two people experience, let's say, 10 minutes completely differently.
Yeah.
One is very relaxed and gets into mind-wandering states, and then suddenly 10 minutes are gone like nothing.
Yeah.
And the other one is bored, and for him, 10 minutes stretch like nothing.
Well, let's take this to our audience then, because I mean, it could well be that you're bored. So, how are you experiencing time? You're watching us talk, you know, part of this experience, but how are you experiencing time?
Well, I had this same idea that, yes, often in a conference, when I'm forced to sit, I get very good ideas. Because normally, yes, I don't feel bored. I can, if you have the freedom to use the time for, let's say, go with the flow of thoughts that you have, or walk around, then it's experienced differently. I think it's something like that too. Like, how can you interact? Is there something like that in your research? Like, the boredom is only put on you if you feel some restriction, or?
We had one study of solitude where we looked at the way people use the time that they have at their disposal when they are not engaged in anything, and how it's correlated with other personality variables. And we found that people with higher ego development, which is basically a proxy for some personality development, they tend to have a more wide repertoire of things that they do when they are alone. And they experience more positive emotions in the process. They don't experience less negative emotions, but more positive emotions. So on balance, they're better off.
So again, it's related to knowing yourself, to the knowledge of self. You know, to spending time becoming yourself's friend. I don't know how else to put it, but you're never alone in a good way. You know, like you're in the company of yourself. So it's
and right now we're all in the company of ourselves, and so we're monitoring, we're responding to right now how we're feeling about the passing of the time within this context. So I just Yeah.
I had a little question for the panel. It's about art, because we create art and we consume art to alter our states of consciousness in a way, to some extent, right? I was wondering if you had any thoughts to share about that, and especially I'm curious about what happens to different media and to art and the perception of art in different media. What's a difference between a moving image and maybe a still image like a photograph, and or music, for example, like time-related art with more static art that we still, of course, perceive in time, but it's a snapshot of reality, like a painting. I don't know. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I think Mark can answer that.
Well volunteered.
Well, but he has research on this.
He does.
So,
He does.
Well, I think is probably one thing is how you get immersed into the piece of art. I think that's the crucial thing, yeah. So how you resonate with what is presented to you. It could be static art, or it could be some more dynamical form. I mean, music is probably the prototypical art form where you can actually, with induction of emotions, you can really be in part of the music, or because the music resonates so much with you and your memories and your emotions that you completely lose your sense of being here. It's as if you were in you could say acoustical virtual reality, because you're somewhere in a different land. And being immersed into something then means you some sort of lose time. What you probably referred to was one master thesis which we published, which where we actually looked at an audience, an audience of a real dance performance, watching two different dance pieces. Okay. One very slow, one very dynamic and fast.
Right.
And after each dance piece, we asked the audience or individual people, were up to 60 in two different evenings, how they experienced, what was the experience. And what we found out is that the more they in the slow dancing performance, which was some sort of very, you could say, trend to boring, nothing much was happening. People were more self-reflecting, more aware of themselves, and they felt that actually this piece was much longer than the more dynamic piece, although they both had the same duration of 5 minutes. So you see, again, it's if you more refer to yourself while you're seeing something, a piece of art, then you also time stretches. But if you're absorbed, let's say, in the more dynamical dance piece, you're totally in the dance piece and you follow it, then you lose more track of time and time passes more quickly.
It just made me think while you were saying that. I mean, as conference speakers, you tell people about your work, your papers, and so on, and then at the end, there's time for questions, and you take it. There are now time for. I mean, I've just been saying, is anybody want to ask a question? And then there's this almost palpable tension where people feel, because it's been opened over to them, they cannot traverse that gap and actually ask a question. Or actually, sometimes my mind immediately goes blank at that very moment. I have got a question or several questions, but I can no longer access it. So there's something going on. What's going on there?
That's a question for the psychoanalyst.
Oh, good. Well volunteered, Mark. Great.
Nice, Mark. Well, I don't know if that's an experience that everybody has. I actually, that would be a very interesting question. Do people feel pressure
we need research on this.
We do. I don't think that's true for a lot of people, that their mind goes blank when they're asked a question.
Well, it's not just that it goes blank. Sometimes they just cannot answer a question. They might have the question.
It's the pressure of having all the attention on you, though. I think that's more about being self-aware,
well, surely
self-conscious, self-consciousness, rather than a perception of time in that way. But can I go a bit more about the art? Because I've had this discussion with a lot of people about art, and there's so many examples that they're not necessarily a piece of art, like an installation or a painting, but it's artistic in the way that we perceive it. It could be an advertisement. It could be, it could be anything really, or a poster, and I really do think that art is one of those magical things that humans produce that can not just move you to tears of, spin you into panic, but it can actually modify time. I really think that there's something to it. That's one of those human.
Like Mark's example of music.
Absolutely, and it could be very conventional, like a movie. That a movie with slow scenes, in a way that is dragging out, and you're feeling like you'd be sitting there for hours, versus a Run Lola Run kind of movie that you're just on your toes and you're thinking it's a 20-minute movie. So it's really I think art is one of those time altering. It is like a time machine for humanity.
Any final thoughts then?
I would like to make a little point on art. To me, the function of art is that it's a life-altering experience. Like in the Middle Ages, people would live boring and dirty lives, and then they would come into a shiny white cathedral, which is like completely different life with celestial images, and they would get an idea that their own life might change in some way following this experience. And contemporary art just gives us more advanced forms of having those experiences of different life. For example, a movie with its total immersion, or some kind of an interactive installation where you can actually face some new experiences which give you ideas about ways you could live. So I think that's what art is about, functionally, for psychologists, of course.
Yeah, you're right. We're in this space, aren't we? This is an academic space. It's designed for learning, apparently. There's a question mark over that, perhaps, but different spaces are causing different awarenesses. Anyway, so look, what I'd like to do is just say thank you very much for coming and having a go at looking at this question. And I think it has brought up, obviously, more questions than answers, but that's a healthy thing. So can I just thank not just these guys, but also the audience as well. And I say it like this: thank you very much for what you've done in the past that's brought you to now. And thank you for what you're doing now. And thank you for what you're going to do. Thank you. Okay, let's carry on filming. No. All right, we'll go home now. No.